It's recording. That's gonna piss me off.
Yeah, I see it there.
Okay, let everyone know they're being recorded. Cool. All right, how are you doing?
Oh, good. Hanging in there. Yeah. Yeah.
Are you already in? You're in North Carolina already, right?
Yeah. So Murphy, North Carolina, just that little corner tucked away on the westernmost point of North Carolina. Um, I'm in South Carolina at one of my friends' house for a little Christmas gathering right now.
Cool.
So that was that last minute trip that had come up. It's a 3 hour drive, so I had to leave around 11:20 just to get a charging stop in and everything.
Oh, dang. I was actually in North Carolina yesterday. I had to drive up there to. We were supposed to go pick up a car. It turned out the car that wasn't there. We couldn't find the customer, and so
What?
it was like a 5 hour drive. So I ended up driving for about 12 hours. Yeah, it was,
Geez, big waste
and
of
it was all
time.
for nothing. It was pretty frustrating to be honest. It was a
Yeah,
long day yesterday.
I drove up from Florida um yesterday morning. Yeah, I left about 6:30, got up at 5:30, left about 6. Um Added about an hour for charging time, ended up being pretty close. I ran into an hour of traffic, so it was right at 12 hours total.
Mm. I'd
Yeah.
imagine. Did you get to use autopilot at all?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think it was in total 550 miles. I think 400 of it's just on straight like I-75 interstate. So it's great. It's a may or may not have read half of a book on the way. Just,
It depends on who's asking, right?
yeah, depends on the liability.
Okay. The worst part of this is always the beginning. Once the conversation starts, it's kind of just goes along. It's still I've done quite a few, but it's really hard to start the conversation because it's like usually the beginning. It's like me trying to ask pinpoint questions. So I'm just gonna just open it up at random, and then we'll just flow and just keep the conversation as best as we can.
Yeah, sure. I'm pretty much an open book. I don't mind really talking about anything personal or not. Um, if my experience can help somebody through anything similar or not, then that's good enough for me.
Cool beans. Okay, so we'll start with birth. Okay, all right. So where are you born? Yeah, just
Um,
a generic question, just to throw it out there.
yeah, so I grew up in Central Florida, between Orlando and Tampa. I was born early January 3rd, 1990. So 31, almost 32 years old. Was born in Winter Haven, grew up in Haines City, Auburndale. Those are all kind of around the Lakeland area between Orlando and Tampa.
Gotcha.
Um, yeah.
All right. Just because mental note, I just realized I didn't introduce you. Hi, everyone. This is Casey. Casey, hello. We're just going to be discussing portions of his life and his life experiences. Ran into him the other day while I was at work and saw how interesting his life was. So we're just going to dive on in. Did you have a rough upbringing, or was it quite simplistic in terms of, I guess, 0 to 12, so to speak?
um, I'm gonna go with obviously aspects of both. When you say rough, people tend to envision a struggle. My parents did really well to hide that struggle from me. So yes, I grew up in a struggle entangled environment. But my parents did a really good job of keeping that from me. Um, we were in a single wide mobile home trailer until I was 9. We graduated to a double wide until I moved out on my own at 21. Um, yeah, 21. Um, so yeah, financially speaking, it was rough. But there was no violence, there was no risk of homelessness, there was nothing like that I would consider rough for a lot of people. It was really just more financial than anything. Um, but it was good in the sense that my parents, they did have my best interest at heart, and I know a lot of people, some people don't experience that. So from a modest perspective, I don't think it was rough, but there were definitely aspects that made it harder to flourish in a social aspect. So there were definitely ways where it was a struggle and ways that it wasn't.
Okay, I can see that. From your upbringing, I guess, how do you translate that to your kids? I know we haven't spoke about that yet, and that's kind of skipping bases, but you have two kids.
Two kids. My daughter is 11. She'll be 12 in March. My son is 7. He'll be 8 in January. We actually have the
Wait,
same
wait.
birthday, January 3rd.
Y'all both have the
Uh,
same birthday, you and your son?
yeah,
Oh,
my
that's
son
cool.
share the same
That's really
birthday.
dope. That's dope.
Yeah. Well, he ended up being. Let's see. Our daughter was breech, so she was a C-section, and then I guess if you have a C-section, you can opt for a C-section for subsequent children. Um, and I want to say he was actually facing the wrong way as well. But we ended up doing a C-section with him too, and they gave us like a 3-day window. Like, pick one of these 3 days, and we're gonna do it. And I was like, "Well, my
It's gotta
birthday."
be
Like, yeah,
that.
exactly. And they gave us like the
That's
third, fourth,
genius.
or fifth, or something like that. And I was like, "The third? Like, how cool would it be to share a birthday with your kid?" Um, Birthdays were never really, again, probably just from growing up poor. Like, birthdays were never having a birthday a week or so after Christmas, and growing up super duper poor. Like, birthdays just became non-exciting for me after like 10. Because that's when the age I kind of started to realize like the financial struggle that exists, and almost kind of feeling guilty for expecting anything on my birthday, if that makes sense. So birthdays pretty quickly became just another day for me. So I had no problem like conceding that day to,
Your child.
right, probably because it's an opportunity to provide better for him than I had for myself. So it's almost like a graduation in my own way in that respect of I have an opportunity to do better than what I was raised with.
Okay, so after giving it some forethought and connecting a couple dots, you said you moved out at around 21, right? And
Hmm.
your daughter is also 11. Given your age, I'm assuming you moving out had some consequence to do with your daughter being born, or at least conceived.
The timing is coincidental. So
Okay.
um, let me recap this the best I can. So um, my children's mother and I, we got together in high school. She was one grade below me, so I was 18, she was 17. We had that whole like high school love, we're gonna go after the world kind of thing. Um, yeah, talk about rose-colored glasses, right? Um, but yeah, and that works for some people, it does. But for us, like, we were kids, we didn't know what the world was like. We thought we knew. Um, got hit pretty quickly with reality. We ended up splitting up 2015, early 2015. Um, but we had this whole like dive headfirst into life attitude. Um, didn't think things through very well. We had our daughter pretty early. She was born in 2010, so about 2 years after I graduated high school, we had a kid. Um, my parents. So when I was in college, I I'm sorry, high school. I was looking at college recruiting events at our school, and my parents liked the idea of living in the mountains in North Carolina. One of the schools was High Point University in High Point, North Carolina.
That's such
Um,
a funny name.
I know, right? But I kind of looked into the school. It seemed like a really nice school. Had a lot of extracurriculars that I would have been into. Um, but I realized after probably a month or so of talking about it and getting into the idea of going there, my parents were looking at houses up that way. Um, they kind of fell in love with the idea of living in the mountains in a log cabin. Um, so I looked into the school. I don't remember. It was one of the times I was combing through their website. I noticed that they only offered master's degrees, and affordability would have been a huge issue going like straight for a master's degree. So I kind of dropped that idea. but my parents didn't drop the idea of wanting to live in the mountains. So they moved out and kind of just left me and my partner and our newborn child in the house. They obviously couldn't make 2 house payments. They were behind already. Honestly, looking back, I don't know how they got approved for purchasing another different home, but um, they let the existing home go back to the bank. So they're kind of just like, you can live here until the bank takes it back, and then after that, you'll figure it out. And I was like, okay. Um, I thought I
This
would
was like
have,
what, 2021?
yeah, and this was 2010, 2011, 2021, around that time frame.
That's
Um,
that's wild.
Yeah, well, it was shortly after the housing crisis in 2008. So I was under the impression like it's going to take them like a year to get through this paperwork. So cool, I'm fine with it. Like that'll give me enough time to save up money, get my own place, whatever. Um, yeah, 2 months after they moved out, we got a letter that was like, "You got to get out." I was like, "Okay, all right." So
10 months too
we
early.
found, yeah, right. We found a fairly affordable place. I was working at the time when we moved out. I was working for practically minimum wage at Chick-fil-A. No, this was I think I was doing I was a line cook at a bar at that time, which was like $8, $9 an hour. Um, my wife at the time did not work. She had an associate's degree. I was working on my bachelor's degree. I had my associates. No, she finished her associates after we moved out, but we were, like I said, man, we were just like practically still teenagers. But I kind of knew what I was doing, but still, like living on our own was just a completely new thing. Um, but we were both in college still, and we had Pell Grants and things like that to help. We went to a local community college, so we actually got Pell Grant refunds at the end of the semester. Between Pell Grant refunds, tax returns for having a child, and my basically minimum wage job, um, we made enough to get by, but nothing spectacular, nothing. Any amount that I could save got completely wiped out by these random semi-emergencies that people tend to experience. You know, pop a tire, I got a flat tire. My
Yeah, I
wife
get what
had,
you're saying. Yeah.
yeah,
Life,
she
life experience, regular, normal life experiences.
right. They're like once you're an adult, you have things to kind of like you might have a savings account or like an FSA. She had a dental emergency, and I had to take her to the dentist, and it was like $1,300 that completely wiped out my savings. Things that an adult might have like an HSA or an FSA for that I hadn't had the opportunity to build yet.
So, do you think, because I know you guys aren't together anymore, we discussed that prior to. Do you think moving out so early and having like that responsibility kind of like thrown on you guys' back kind of caused the split? Or was it like y'all were young and y'all just had like personality clashes that caused you to split as time went by?
Both, definitely both. You know, some people are built for that like immediate commitment in life. Some people's mentality, their psyche is made for a partner. And some people have to experience other life experiences before they're ready for a partner, I think. Um, my mentality was ready. I was ready for, okay, let's set goals. Let's knock these goals out. Let's progress through life and do this. Um, she was not. She needed that life experience, that basically college level experience of becoming an adult before she would have been ready for a relationship. And obviously, that's not something you know as a teenager. Um, especially like if you. I don't want to insult anybody that's been through this situation by making light of my own, but um, if you lack the forethought enough to have a child that early without really like knowing yourself or your partner like that, because in the moment it feels like you do. You know, as you're living your life, it feels like, you know, we've all been a teenager. We all know that we feel like we've got it figured out.
Yeah.
Um, and just the realization that you don't have it figured out is earth rattling. Um,
to say the
you know,
least.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
crazy.
Luckily we were able to keep things really amicable. Especially like I said, being like high school first love kind of thing. You never that never leaves you. It does for some people, but I think generally it doesn't. And there's a lot of ways that I would still do anything for this woman to make sure that she's good, right? Like
I
I
get what you're
I
saying. Yeah.
would never let her fall on her face if I could help it without sacrificing my state too much. Um, but she takes care of the kids sometimes, so she's got to be good for them.
Yeah. Um, how do you balance the co-parenting thing? How does that work? Because I know some of my relatives that have their back and forth in terms of co-parenting, but like, how is your balance? How did you come up with your rapport?
Um, when we split, I drew a line in the sand and explained to her that there's no way I would ever settle for anything less than 50-50. Because to me, kids do need both parents. I had always thought that. I know it's hard to do 50-50 sometimes, like school schedules and things like that, especially if you don't live close to your previous partner. Um, but we were close. I mean, we were within 5 miles. We were both within 15 minutes of their school. My hours at work made that a little hard to do sometimes. And I mean, if you plotted it out on a calendar, it probably wasn't actually 50-50, but it was as close as we could make it. Um, because there are things that I can do for these kids that she can't, and vice versa. I think it's really important for kids to have both of those experiences. Um, there were growing pains accommodating that, like learning to live that shared lifestyle. I think the hardest part about it was learning to communicate in a different way than we were used to. Um, talking about like doctor's appointments and things like that. Like it's not just as simple as having your child sleep with you at night, and that's kind of it. There's school events, there's the things that you have to purchase for the children, there's doctor's appointments and things like that. Um, I was happy to take on the financial burden of everything, like field trips, agendas, school uniforms, things like that,
Yeah.
because I made a decent amount of money, and she, when she worked, did not. Um, so that was never really like a point of contention. It was something that I conceded early on that I'd have to take care of them in that way because she may not always be able to.
Um, have you ever had like an issue with, say, hypothetically speaking, or possibly her having a partner and then like your reaction to her kid's partner? Because I have a relative. He's I don't know if it's like a masculine thing or an insecurity thing or a protection thing. He doesn't like his child's mother having any partner of hers touch or interact in an intimate way with his child. He's like, don't touch my daughter. Don't. You can talk to her, you can play with her, but don't hug her. Don't touch her. Don't interact with her as if you were a part of our family because I don't want her confused. And I don't know if it's her that's going to be confused or that's more in his head. So how about yourself?
Well, very surface level observation, I would probably say that's in his head. Myself, so my my ex-wife's, they're no longer currently together, but they were together for pretty much the entire previous 6-ish years. But her partner was textbook narcissism, possessive, easily offended, presumptive. So I mean, he was a lot of these things that I feared, and I remember specifically, like, so the stages of grief. I remember in my anger stage of separating from my ex-wife, that I remember specifically telling her, I hope he's a monster to you and you realize how bad you're messing up. And I regret saying that. You know, that's not a nice thing to say,
Well, I
particularly
mean,
because it
in your
turned out to be
defense, like,
true.
in your defense or any natural human's defense, when you're going through an emotional overdrive like that, you tend to have extreme things to say, especially as a man, because we're not used to really honing in on our emotions. We kind of just let the most men, at least, like the stereotypes,
Yeah,
we kind of just suck them in and let them pass by. So when you actually feel your emotions, you kind of react in a more explosion style.
yeah. And part of that statement was based off of interactions that I've had or seen with him already. So, like, I kind of had an inclination that he had the potential to be that way. And I'm a fairly good judge of character. I think I tend to hit the nail on the head a lot when it comes to people and their personality, idiosyncrasies, their traits, things like that. So I kind of picked up on it super quickly, just based off of the very brief conversations we had had up to that point. But like I said, like, I don't. Obviously, nobody means for anyone else to be abused mentally, emotionally, physically, whatever. Um, but he turned out to be most of those things. Very manipulative, emotionally abusive. Um, and something about her personality got hooked by that. Um, and they ended up, separating, getting back together probably a dozen times over the past 5 years. Like, it's crazy how unstable all of that was. Um, I'm kind of sorry. I'm kind of trailing off and forgetting, like, what was your? Oh, how do I deal with, like,
How do
what's
you deal
my
with
opinion
like
on
that?
like
Yeah.
presumptive? Yeah. So, um, I guess the question is, in that scenario, like, how do you approach a narcissist that takes care of your kids half the time, or is around your kids half the time? Um, obviously you want everybody to get along, and yeah, I'm telling you, that was one of the hardest things I've ever had to navigate in my life. Trying to figure this man out, what sets him off, what doesn't. Um, and funny enough, I had to purposely set him off a couple of times to find those boundaries. That was really entertaining, but um,
At least you.
you gotta find the boundaries and then learn how to operate inside of them. Um, and he had two kids of his own from previous marriage, so I had seen him interact with and parent his kids a little bit. So for me, it wasn't that much of an issue because I know that from an objective perspective, this man loves his kids and he loves my ex-wife. So logic would state that he would take care of my kids too. Um, and
Hoping that turned out to be the case.
yeah, yeah, no, he never put his hands on my kids, never did anything that I'm aware of to them that would hurt them long term. Like no outbursts or anything like that. Um, and a lot of his negative traits were more so just manipulation, emotional and um, verbal than anything else.
Have you ever come into contact with his ex-wife?
Yeah,
Because
not
I feel
very
like
much.
that would tell a lot about him if you come into contact with where he was before.
So, of course, when you start talking to a potential partner and they have an ex and they tell you their story about how it didn't work out with their ex, like, you always take that with a grain of salt because you're hearing their perspective, and every story has two sides. In this case, both he and his ex-wife were that shit crazy, dude. You couldn't believe
The
either one
best
of
way
them.
to describe it.
And to give you some perspective, like why I think that and why I say that, I didn't have a ton of interaction with her. I think we both ended up on a field trip with our kids because they all went to the same school. We both ended up on a field trip with the kids, and there was one conversation like immediately after we all split. Um, she tried to invite me out to bars, and I essentially had it confirmed that her intention was to seduce me to get back at her husband for sleeping with my ex-wife. It was some whole like Jerry Springer shit. But um, I as soon as I picked up on like, because she messaged me on Facebook and it started off just like an innocent conversation, and it was, then it moved to alcohol and, oh, do you like this? You like Crown Apple? We should go out to a bar and have some. And I was like, no, I see what you're doing. Like, just stop it. Like, I'm not into that. I'm not the revenge type of person. Like, if you have an issue with what's happened, take it out with your
Damn.
soon to be ex-husband, I guess.
Yeah.
But don't try to get me to sleep with you to get back at them. Like, that's not me.
Yeah, I understand that a lot. Did Have you ever like spoken to your kids about, well, obviously you probably have, but like do you see any effects that maybe they never mentioned in terms of your kids with the hassle back and forth? Well, I don't want to say hassle because that sounds negative, but you get what I
No,
mean? Like,
yeah, I know what you're trying to say. Um, it when we split up, my son was like 1, so it wasn't as dramatic on him because it's kind of all he's ever known. But my daughter was 5, so she can vaguely remember like a time when their mom and I were together. They can remember a time when we were all in the. She can remember a time when we were all in the same household. Um, it's been a little destabilizing for her, but I think there was more impact from the lack of consistency with my ex-wife and her then husband. Because, like I mentioned, they split up and got back together several times throughout the years. I think my kids were told on at least 3 separate occasions that this will be the last time you see his kids, and just get used to them not being around. And they would separate, and then it was, just kidding, we're back together, and they're thrown back into this circus, right? Um,
is there tension
so
between the two different groups of kids or
no,
parents?
they got along great. Um, to my knowledge, this other man and his ex-wife ended up getting things figured out, I guess. Um, but I think between the other, speaking specifically of this, whatever you'd call it, I guess, me, my ex-wife, her ex-husband, and his ex-wife,
Square.
between
It's a love square.
all, I guess, I don't know. But between them, there were lots of medication needed, and I think there eventually were doses figured out that they kind of stabilized and got along. Um, but not a lot of tension, not a lot of I guess I don't even know the word I'm looking for, but not a lot of tension to the degree that they couldn't function.
Oh, survival is always best. Um,
Yeah.
what did you go to school for? This is completely
Um,
random, but
so I went to a local community college. By the time I was almost done with my AA, they started offering bachelor's degrees, which was fantastic for me because that meant, one, I got to stay local. Didn't have to uproot my life to figure something out in Tampa or Orlando at USF or UCF. Um, they only had like 6 different degree programs that I could go for. Um, Ended up going with, business administration, supervision, and management. It's kind of like the liberal arts degree of bachelor's degrees. It's just kind of what people tend to go for. Usually easier requirements to hit, more general courses. Um, and I wasn't absolutely sure what I wanted to do with my life at that time. So just in order to kind of keep going and keep taking classes, that's what I went for. So my bachelor's is in supervision and management.
okay. And so you're in sales now. And so what would you say, what I'm trying to get to, what would you say is the biggest takeaway from like your education and like I guess the real world? Because I mean, a lot of people, especially like my age, around 21, anywhere between like 18 to 24, it feels like no matter how much school you go through, it doesn't seem to translate into, I guess, what everyone's chasing is dollars, but in terms of like, it doesn't translate into you actually developing a career out of everything you've studied. It feels almost like a waste, and unless it's like nursing or You know what I mean? Like very,
Right.
very, very linear in terms of pathways.
Yeah, you're correct. So that's actually what I was going to say, was that unless your degree is a specialized field that leads directly to a career path, such as nursing, computer science, um, or something very specialized. Like my daughter wants to be an archaeologist because she's obsessed with Jurassic Park. And I'm like, I don't understand how you turn that into a career. I don't know what's the career path
I
for archaeology, but
don't know. A
I
lot of
have,
digging.
have thought that, yeah, I have thought that multiple times about my degree. My degree, practically speaking, from a career perspective, has been useless. Um, Employers don't consider degrees experience anymore. That's probably one of the biggest obstacles, is that, even if you have a bachelor's degree, they still want X number of years of experience in management. And, you're thrown into this conundrum of, how do I get experience without getting a job? And how do I get a job without having experience? Um, so my biggest benefit from my degree has been more so a thought process adjustment, learning how to research properly, how to um, confirm thought processes through deconfirmation of other thought processes. Um, More so just mental adjustments rather than anything else, through the research papers and all of that.
Okay.
But yeah, you're right. I my career history has mainly been sales, because that's been like the easiest field to get into, that paid the most money. And like I said, kind of growing up, frankly, poor, and progressing from minimum wage jobs to having to support, someone else, and one and then two kids. Sales kind of was the option for me, because it was like, this is what you can do, that's going to pay you what you need. Um, and then I just kind of never left it. Um, I was working for AT&T up until a month ago. I'm transitioning into software sales, because they have the remote work from home function, which is going to be great. It's a lot easier than a random schedule every week. Um,
How does it work with AT&T and sales? Do you get paid off like phones, or is it TV service, or is it they're like separate entities, or like how does that work?
all of the above. So their hourly was really competitive. I think they're hiring now at around 14, 13.50, 14 an hour. With AT&T, they have a wireless, what is it called? CWA. Um, it's a union. CWA is the acronym. I don't know. I don't remember. Communication Workers of America, I think it is. But part of their union contract is you get 3 raises a year. You get a semi-annual raise, and then you get a cost of living raise in February. You get your semi-annual raises up until you hit your maximum payout on your hourly. It took me about 3 years to get there. And then you just get a cost of living raise every year. But the hourly is pretty great. Um, the payout, the commission payout on everything else just kind of always changes. I think I went through 2 or 3 different comp plans while I was there over 5 years. Um, they pay the most, at least as of the time that I left, based off new phone numbers. So when you add a new line to an account, or you subscribe a customer to new internet or TV service, those kind of paid the most, based on each action that you did. And then there were a couple of things that were percentage based, like your insurance attach rate, your accessory attach rate, things like that. But overall, it paid
That's
pretty well.
that sounds really, really complex.
It kind of was, but like, you also kind of just learn what pays you and what doesn't. Um, if I had a customer that was being picky about wanting their monthly price to stay below a certain amount, I would know to offer them insurance over a more expensive phone, because I'd get paid more based on insurance than based off if they bought a more expensive phone or something like that. So
Um,
it's about framing of, like, you could spend $45 a month on this phone, or you could spend $35 a month, get insurance. You're only paying $5 more than you're covered if X, Y, or Z happens. Then a lot of people are like, yeah, that makes sense. And then I'd get paid for a new phone and for insurance rather than just the new phone.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. Um, how would how would you approach customers? That's too vague of a question. What I mean by that is like knowing, especially for people like say myself entering sales, how do you find a way to approach the customer without trying to, I guess, convey a message of, oh, I'm trying to get you to spend money so I make money, but rather like, hey, I'm trying to help
I'm
you,
here for
but
you,
I also
right?
make money by helping you.
Um, I will say that there's almost been a generational shift in the sales environment over the past several years. Um, when you look at the last generation, it was like customers felt almost entitled and they were on the lookout for something for being sold, and everybody always is. But lately, there's been this shift of customers just really, really appreciating honesty. And there were a lot of customers who, well, I'll get to that, but just to answer your question a little more directly, this was a walk-in sales position. People would come to the store, and I would help them. I would hear out what they wanted to do first. Then, of course, in my mind, I'm already kind of like going in the direction of what's going to pay me the most on this. Um, and me personally, my objective was to help the customer more than to make money for myself. Like, I wasn't going to suggest they do something that would put them in a bad position just so I could make $5, $6. Like, it wasn't worth it for me. But um, you had to find a way to bridge that gap between what they're asking for and what's going to pay you, while not putting them in a bad position, at least, you know, based off my preference. Um, so a lot of times I'd ask, like, do you have a kid that is coming of age that you're considering getting a phone for? That's how I would get new lines to accounts. I would look for ways to save people money. Like, maybe your current phone isn't under a promotion, but if you trade it in, you can get one on a promotion and you'll end up actually saving $5 a month while getting a new phone. Um, and a lot of people, back to the honesty thing, a lot of people appreciated me saying, well, if you do this, I'm going to make a small amount of money, but the amount of money I would make is not worth it to put you in a bad position. So I wouldn't recommend doing this if it wasn't actually going to help you in some way. Yes, I do get paid on it, but whether I did or not, I'd still recommend that you do it. And that kind of like disarmed a lot of people, and that notion of you're just trying to tell me to do this so you make some money,
Mm.
right? Um, but I can tell you a lot of the older crowd, like the baby boomers, still think that way. And it's really hard to break that thought process. Even if you've done it for years with other groups of people, the boomers are the hardest people to convince that they're just, it's like they grew up believing everything was a scam. And you're just not going to convince them. Um, a prime example is, you remember these old, I don't know if you remember actually, but before unlimited data plans went away, like the first time, it was something that nobody really ever used because our phones, this is, before the smartphone era, phones didn't use data all that much. Um, I think sending picture messages or um, emails with attachments were kind of the only things that use data. So AT&T, of course, had all the carriers had an unlimited data option that once you had that option, it's there. Um, and then I guess they restructured things to where they went to like a shared data plan where you had X amount of gigabytes of data for everybody on your account to pull together and use. Well, during that time, a lot of people who worked for cellular companies would tell customers who had this previous unlimited thing, like, you can't get this anymore, don't get rid of it. Um, Naturally, unlimited plans came back because we started using our phones for social media and things like Skype calls,
Yeah.
um, things
Yeah.
like that. And unlimited data came back for everybody on an account. Well, I would occasionally run into people who still had these first generation unlimited plans where they're paying an extra $40 a month for one phone number to have unlimited data. And I was like, you can just switch to this group unlimited plan where everybody has unlimited and it's $30 a month less than what you're paying now. And people are like, no, I don't want to switch. I'm like, why? It's like literally the same thing. It's even probably more beneficial because you don't have overage costs. You get free North America calling, and everybody in your account's unlimited. And it's $30 less per month. Like what's the downside to this? And they're like, nope, I was just told years ago to never change it, so I'm not going to. It's like, when you were told that, these new unlimited plans didn't exist, and now they do. So, and
Yeah.
they're like, nope, not
Why
going
would
to
you
change
get a
it.
new phone but not a new data plan? It's kind of
I had
like,
a customer. I had a customer who switching them to the current unlimited plans um, gave them a ton of more features like hotspot and things like that, and would have reduced their bill like $55 a month. And they said no, just because they didn't want to get rid of the old plan, just because they couldn't get it back if they lost it. Um, so I know that doesn't directly answer a question, but there
I
are
mean, it
some
kind of
people that
does.
you just can't approach. Like, it doesn't matter what you say or do; they're just not gonna. They're stuck. There are some people who are too stuck in their ways to adapt.
And so, I know we haven't mentioned this in the pod at all, but you're moving to North Carolina to help your mom out. So I wanted to throw that out there. So,
Yeah,
how are
for sure.
you transitioning with that? Coming from Florida, getting to Georgia, and now just slowly moving further north.
Yeah, yeah. So I know. Hopefully, I don't go too much further north. North Carolina is cold enough. Um, but to give you more background on that, I don't know if you just didn't want to dive into this because you're not quite sure where the personal line is or not. I don't mind sharing. I'm from Florida. I started dating a girl who was from Alabama who came down to Florida for a career, and we met. We started dating pretty seriously. I think we've been together over 2 years, and she took a promotion to the Atlanta region. So after probably navigating the worst minefield of my life by asking my ex-wife to let the kids move with us out of state, um, we eventually got settled on something that she agreed to let the kids move with us to Georgia. We moved to Georgia, and then about 11 months later, I don't know if it was just finally living in the same house or what. But sometimes relationships just don't work out, and that's kind of what I was thrown into, of having to be out of state in an area where I know nobody besides my 10 coworkers, um, and also trying to find a place that would keep my kids in a good school that I could afford, um, that wouldn't really disturb them too much. Um, that was in the at the end of October. All that started happening. Um, my dad passed away from COVID. He was unvaccinated, very stubborn, but he passed away at the end of September. So I was still kind of dealing with that when you throw in a breakup of an over 3 year relationship that you relocated for. Um, I had all these options in my head, like, do I move back down to Florida where all my friends are? Um, but I still run into the issue of affordability in schools. Do I try to find a place locally and stay local where the schools are really great, but I might struggle financially and start living paycheck to paycheck because it's just me and two kids? Or, do I kind of just swallow my pride and say, you know what, it's not the worst thing in the world starting over at 31, move back in with my mom and try to find the silver lining there. Um, and that's kind of what I did for a couple of different reasons. One is to help my mom out. My dad was the one who did all the maintenance stuff, pressure washing the deck, cleaning the gutters. They have a gravel driveway on the side of a mountain, and that has to be refilled every now and then. Just things like that my mom has never had to do. And that was a big reason that I chose to move in with my mom. But the other biggest reason probably is that, when you kind of get locked into life, right? Like when you get put in this situation where you're just comfortable enough that you can't really afford to take any risks, that's when your life starts becoming like a day-to-day thing. And that's what starts wearing on you, whether people realize it or not, is when your routine is too consistent, it's just as bad as not having a routine at all. Um,
Yeah,
so moving in
that's a
with my
nice
mom,
quote.
what?
I said that's a nice quote.
Yeah, right. So moving in with my mom really kind of gave me that ability to take a risk and try something else. Um, and that's why I'm transitioning into the job that I am, which fortunately it looks like it'll end up being better than AT&T as far as pay goes. Um, their benefits aren't quite as great, but I think it's still outweighed by the increase in pay. Um, but more importantly, just gaining that ability to take a risk has been just a huge breath of fresh air to me. Um, because if that job doesn't work out, I, I was at AT&T 5 years, mainly because they paid just enough to keep me comfortable and not encourage me to look somewhere else. Um, so if this job doesn't work out, what's the worst case scenario? I have a little bit of savings to live off of, and I'll find something else. Those are risks that you can't take when you're on your own, especially with two kids. Because what happens if your job is miserable or you don't make as much money as you thought you would? You might have to pick and choose what gets attention. Like, do I have to cancel my kid's dentist appointment because I don't have money for the copays and the 20% that insurance doesn't cover? Do I have to put off a physical for my daughter's soccer because I can't afford the $95 physical visit? Like, I didn't want to be put in that position. So, the lifting the financial worries and the financial burden of moving back in with my mom was probably a really good thing for the time being. And like I mentioned, kind of like swallowing your pride. Like, lots of people start over for lots of different reasons in their life, and this very well may not even be the last time that I start over. So, kind of coping with, hey, starting over is not a bad thing. Um, was probably the hardest part about all of this for me. One of my friends said something that really kind of resonated with me through all of this. I leaned on him pretty heavy trying to figure out all this stuff, like what all my options are, what my best option was. I'm terrified of making bad decisions, which has been really kind of hindering in my life. But
I feel the
my
same
friend said,
way.
yeah, it's like, dude, I'm so terrified of just not making the optimal decision. Um, and in this situation, there were too many unknown factors to really kind of to determine a best decision. Um, but my friend said, Casey, you do have a few options in front of you, and I know none of them particularly feel great, but they're none of them seem great because they're all good options. It just doesn't feel good because you're being forced to make a choice. Somebody else is making this decision for you, and you have to determine what's best for you. Versus if you decided to do this, for example, if you decided to end your relationship, these options wouldn't feel so terrible because you're the reason you're making the decision, not someone else. Um, so that kind of helped open my eyes to, like, yeah, you know what, my options aren't terrible. They really aren't. Um, and I accepted that, I have to start over. I've got to flip that switch and start over. Um, and then the options kind of started seeming not so intimidating. Um, and moving in with mom to help her out, to help me out, it's a mutually beneficial situation. Um, really just kind of started seeming like a good option. I'll have an opportunity to save some money to get into property investment or whatever my next venture turns out to be.
And you'll have the opportunity to have a foundation where you can, per se, hypothetically build your next building, so to speak, if that makes sense. Like you have the flower bed to plant your seeds in order for something greater to blossom.
Right.
While if you were still on your own, struggling from paycheck to paycheck, or without the excess money necessary to save, then it's finding a way to where you can set your finances to where you make the excess money, but there's no time frame on that. And you're gonna have to sit there and juggle with life until it finally gets there, and then something happens. That's how life always works. Something happens, and everything that you built so far it falls apart. You got to put it back together. And falls apart. You got to put it back together. So
Yeah.
unfortunately, well, I mean, that's not really unfortunate. I loved how after listening to everything, I love how the decision process made, and I feel like that is the right decision.
Yeah, I think so too. As much as I hate to admit it, I mean, money runs the world, right? Like that has to
Yeah,
be, even if you don't want it to be, it kind of has to be your primary objective. Um,
unfortunately.
at least in the beginning, and not having a financially appealing option to stay where I was or move back to Florida really kind of just eliminated those things. Um, so moving back in with mom was kind of the the only decision left. Hang on one second. Sorry.
No, you're fine.
Um, yeah, just having that flexibility of, like I said, it's looking like this job is going to turn out to pay as much or maybe even a little more than I thought initially. So, how long am I going to stay with my mom? As long as she needs me, but obviously not going to be 1, 2, 3 years, probably 6 months to a year or so, and save up some money in the meantime, pay off some debt. Maybe try to focus on paying my car off to alleviate that monthly expense, things like that.
That makes a lot of sense. Speaking of which, we didn't talk about Tessie.
Yeah.
um, just a few like tad bits of like just little advice from you. Number one, what would you say would be the biggest difference between a regular, gasoline vehicle and a Tesla? Just for those humans out there that don't understand.
There's so many points, and I could probably talk about this. Like you could probably have an entire episode dedicated to just these differences, but to keep it short and sweet, it really depends on what your priorities are as a person. For me, my time is invaluable. Um, I don't. My ex-girlfriend that we just separated, she would pay for convenience. Maybe that habit rubbed off on me a little bit, but God, I hate wasting time. Maybe it's because we're kind of stuck in this day-to-day thing where we work so much or feel like we have to work so much. But when I have a day off, I want a day off. I don't want to do anything else besides what I want to do. Um, I would say the biggest alleviation has been leaving work and not having to stop to get gas on the way home. Just because it doesn't seem like a big thing, but like that 5, 10 minutes every time adds up a lot. Not having to get gas on the way to work, um, not having to schedule an oil change on my day off because you've got the travel to and from the shop, you've got however long it's there. I mean, you could do one of those quick like 10-minute oil change things, but I liked taking mine to dealerships because they do the other things, like they check all the other fluid levels, they check your tire gauge or your tire tread depth, um, things like that. Like I always did those just because again, they were convenient. They were things that I didn't have to do separately. Um, and that took like an hour. So, between commuting, you're talking an hour and a half, 2 hours on your day off. Like, man, that adds up so much.
It
Um,
does.
it really
Especially when
does.
like you're working all the time, you feel like you're never actually free to do whatever you want to do. Everything, your life just feels like it's consuming you in a weird way. Like you're never actually free.
It kind of is like you have obligations coming at you from so many different aspects of your life that you're like, sometimes you let things slip that need attention. And just not having to worry about any of those things with a vehicle is so liberating. But like I said, I know that it doesn't, like, people might listen to this and go, well, that's pretty snooty or whatever, but it's one of those things you don't realize. Like, pay attention the next time you do it, or just like for a month, add up how long you're standing at a pump pumping gas. um, and I just would have much rather spent that time somewhere else. um, I
Those are
traveled.
those few moments you could have with your kids before you go tuck them in.
Right,
Because it's
exactly.
like 5-10 minutes seems so short, but it's so long in the lifespan of 24 hours.
Exactly. And I traveled quite a bit. This girl that I was dating that we just split up, she lived about 45 minutes from me. So sometimes I'd go to her house after work or whatever. I mean, I was putting gas in my car once a week, if not more. I was getting an oil change every couple of months instead of every 3 months. So those factors kind of like doubled down, so to say. Um, but I what I was paying for my car before, plus gas and maintenance, was practically the same thing that I paid for my Tesla. So it really wasn't a hard financial transition. The hardest part about it would be, for other people. Sorry, that sounds bad. Let me rephrase that. So the issue other people might run into making that transition would be the paper trail, the approval from a bank for a more expensive loan. Because banks don't, when you get a loan for a gas vehicle, they don't consider or care what you're going to pay for gas or maintenance. Like, they don't factor that into your approval decision. With an electric vehicle, all those costs are kind of rolled into the price of the vehicle. So when you go to get a loan for it, the loan is going to be a higher amount, but they're so much easier to operate and the maintenance is almost non-existent. There's no gas expenditure. The bank doesn't care about those things. So, they just see the sticker price that you want to finance and make a decision based off of that. And that's probably the biggest obstacle is, if banks would consider, yes, this vehicle is expensive, but you're also not going to be spending $150, $200 a month on gas. I feel like that really kind of open up the barrier of entry into electric vehicles a little bit more for everyone.
Yeah. I mean, with every major manufacturer moving towards EVs, I feel like the market's really going to level itself out within the next like 4 or 5 years, or maybe even
Yeah,
sooner than that, because everyone is getting rid of their bigger engines like Dodge. They're getting rid of their V8s, and they're moving to different engines to move towards electric vehicles. So with everyone going towards EVs, I feel like the market's really going to drop. Well, I'm hoping. At least.
potentially. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
at least I'm hoping that's the case. But what would you say would be the best advice that you could give? And I know you probably wouldn't think that, well, I don't know. Some people are like, well, I don't know if I give good advice. Well, what would be the best advice that you could give to a single parent? Even though
Oh
you're
man.
still technically co-parenting, I feel like from my perspective, you're the primary caretaker. So,
Yeah, I did end up being the primary, especially after we moved and things started getting a little more unstable with my ex-wife's relationship. Um, that's a hard question to really pin down because everybody's situation is so different. You've got single parents who there's a high level of resentment between their ex-partner, their kid's mom, or dad. Um, you have parents who can co-parent effectively. Um, but I think the biggest kind of general advice that may not apply to everyone is, obviously you got to think about the kids first. Like, you've got to learn to be able to step out of your own shoes and look at what's happening in your life from an external, unbiased perspective. Um, and that can probably be applied to a lot more in life than just single parenthood. Um, there's there's no shame or guilt in asking for help or having a good relationship with your ex. Like, you don't have to feel bitter, you don't have to take it out on your kids or your ex partner.
thank
um
you for saying that. I appreciate that. because our generation has this idea that if they're an ex, then you can't have like a relationship with them, or it won't. There's no rapport to be had, so to speak. And it's like I don't
Yeah.
think that's the case.
Yeah, and there haven't been a whole lot because again, my previous relationship was over 3 years, but any potential partner that I met or spoke with, I mean, still now I would still do it. When that conversation comes up about, what does your life look like? And, I've got 2 kids, I've got an ex-wife. Like, there's always the disclaimer of my kids are my priority. I do have a good relationship with their mom, and that is important to me, and it's not going to change. Like, it's almost as important as the do you want to get remarried or do you want another kid conversation. Um, because any new partner is going to be involved in your ex-partner's life as well. Like, you're always going to have that relationship. Like, your kids aren't going to go away. Um, Speaking of, my son is here. What's up, buddy? Your jacket? Yes. There you go.
Thank you.
I'll be done soon.
Also, we're having dinner.
Okay.
Oh no, keep away from his plate.
Yeah, I know. But yeah, having that understanding with your current partner, if you have or want one, is super important because it just sets the tone for the rest of the relationship. Um, Partners are going to understand what they're agreeing to when they agree to a relationship with you. It's not just you, it's you and your kids, and if the situation allows, a previous partner as well. It was really important to me to not necessarily get along perfectly, but to be able to do things like go to a school function, like a Christmas play, without shooting the other parents dirty looks. Like, that was really important to me to have at least that relationship with my ex and her partner. Because, like, I don't want the kids to see that. You don't want the kids to feel like they're walking on eggshells in their life, and that's probably the most important thing in my opinion.
That's wonderful. Well, I don't think it's being cut short. I thoroughly enjoyed this. I had fun. I'm sure we could talk about loads more, especially when it comes to Teslas and everything
Oh,
else.
yeah.
But I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate all the words of wisdom that you have passed my way, especially, but to everyone else's way. And thank you so much.
Of course. If you need anybody else on, or you have a gap, or just want to have a follow-up conversation with anything else, just let me know.
Oh, definitely. Very soon, too.
Yeah, for sure.
Like
All right.
maybe a few months from now, a little update.
Yeah, right. 90-day update.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Casey. And you have a wonderful day. Go enjoy dinner.
All right, you too. Bye.